Hi, I'm Chuck Dorsett for Weaver Leather Supply. Let's go with a great project for both a beginner and those of us with a little more experience. To me, that's the perfect video project. Now, if you're new to leathercraft, we're going to hit every element of a standard project. For those of us with a little more experience, that's a nice checkbook cover. All right, so anything I use in this video, weaverleathersupply.com or check below. We've got links there. Going to take you straight to the website. Also, if you want to know when our videos release, just click your notifications. You'll know exactly when these come out. So let's step over to our pattern table, get started. We've got a simple pattern for a simple project that is by no means going to look that way. Perfect. Okay, so we've got digital pics. We'll look at those in just a minute, but here's what we're doing. So we've got a main body. We're going to cut one here. We've got our pockets. We're going to cut two of those, sew those in. For our decoration, we've got this little corner. That's going to be so much easier than it looks. You'll see what I'm talking about. But we're going to drop in two, one on either corner of our face. Now, we could go for absolutely. In fact, the pattern will show us that. But when I'm writing a check, I want a flat surface behind me. So we're just going to add two onto the front, okay? How about our digital pics? So on our main body, an American checkbook is 3 inches by 6 inches. So we're going to go 6.5 inches wide, 1/4 inch either side for our stitch line, 7.5 inches long. On our pocket, we're going to cut two here, 2 3/4 of an inch, and the same 6.5 inches. Over to our corner design. And that's why I say this is going to be so easy, because if we have the 30mm corner knife, that is 3 perfect cuts. That's 2.5 by 2.5. All right, so we've got a feel for what we're doing. Let's step over to our main table, cut some leather. Let's start with our natural veg tan. We'll get these pieces stamped, drying, and we'll jump over to the balance of the project. Now, a couple of big points. First off, we're going to go with a 4 to 5 ounce veg tan. If you're new to leathercraft, if I only have 2 weights of leather in my shop, one's an 8 to 9 ounce, one's a 4 to 5 ounce. We can do just about anything with those 2 weights. Now, for us crafters, this is a single shoulder. A smaller cut, but very affordable for us, but also an excellent quality leather. Now, right here, we're going to need an exact right angle on that. So let's use our square. This is 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in for my edge about 3 inches, and let's make this cut 3 inches out. Big point. New blade or sharp blade every time. Sales pitch, absolutely, but it's a good point. So if you order 100 blades from Weaver, you get this cool little pack, right? Yeah, not really the point. The point is, with this many blades in my shop, I never hesitate to change out my blades. If we do that, our projects will always reflect that. Okay, let's cut 3 by 3. Good. Now let's just trim that out. But we got to remember, this is our square corner. So let's flip that around, drop our pattern on that. Now we're going to go with a walnut dye. It's a pretty dark dye. Pin's not an issue. I'd still like to go a little bit light. But let's just trace that in. Good. We've got it. Let's do the same thing again. Good, those are traced in. Now, we could do one on each side. We'd certainly save some leather. The problem is, in my opinion, it's harder to cut a square than a circle. So we're going to lose a little bit of leather here, but it's absolutely worth it. So let's reset here and step over to a corner knife. Now we can cut these by hand, absolutely, but this makes it so fast and so clean. This is the 30mm. So let's start in the middle. Now this is a knife, it's not a dry punch. We don't need a mallet here. So let's start in the middle. That way if we're just a hair left or hair right, we can adjust. The knife will go off the edge of the leather. We'll never see that. But let's do our best to get just a hair inside of our blue line. That will give us the most accurate cut. Okay, now let's come over to this side. Do the same thing. Let's do our best to get that right in that corner. Good. Same thing over here. And how easy is that and how clean is that? I'm going to do the same thing to this side. Okay, we've got those two pieces. Now let's jump down to a 12mm corner knife. And let's just get the outside corner there. Yeah, notice how easy that is. Good. All right, let's step over to our punch table. We're going to case our leather. First big point, we don't have to. We can simply wet our veg tan, give it about 15 minutes, and then stamp. But if we take the time to case it, it's going to make all the difference in the impression that we get in our leather. So let's start right here. I'm going to drop my veg tan in some water. I'm just going to give it about 3, maybe 4 seconds. Okay, so let's let those lay out, air dry, let some of that excess moisture evaporate. Let's give these about maybe half an hour. We've given these actually about 40 minutes. Now I can feel them. They're wet, absolutely, but they're not overly wet. That's what we're looking for, okay? So let's do this. Let's just lay these down. I'm going to take a piece of our pattern sheeting. Let's cover that, and just a piece of 2x4, just to give it a little bit of weight to seal that in there. Now let's leave this for anywhere from 3, maybe 6 hours, overnight, or even 24 hours. I've given our 2 pieces overnight. That's exactly what we're looking for. They feel moist, but they don't feel wet. But at the same time, I can feel the body is returning to the veg tan. So one more step here. We're going to let these air dry. Could be about a half an hour, could be 2 hours, depending on the humidity in whatever area we're in. But what we're looking for, we want this to start to return to its natural color. So let's give these 45 minutes, see where we are. We've given these exactly 45 minutes. That's what we're looking for. Perfect. Now, here's a picture of the design we're going to do. So we've got 4 tools here. 3 of these we should have in our tool rack. And the 4th, if we've got anybody in our life that likes the nautical stuff, they've got to have a shelf. Now, we'll look at the SKU numbers on each of these as we use them. So let's start right here. We're going to go with a cedar. Right in our corner, let's come in just about 1/2 inch. And let's drop in our cedar. Okay, we've got that. Now, the second, these 2 are a floral tool. I love these, but it's going to be hard to line these up. So let's do this. Let's do this the same way we work with a letter stamp. So on one of these tools, on one end, we've got a point. On the other end, we've got a swirl. So I want the swirl away from my cedar. You'll see where we're going with this. All right, so let's drop our cedar back in. I'm going to take this tool with the point. Let's turn it that way. And I'm actually going to butt it up against my cedar. And right here, I'm going to do my best to keep that parallel to our edge. Okay, there's our first stamp. Let's do the same thing with the other side. And there we go. We've got that lined up pretty well. Now, one thing we can do, we need to practice before we jump over to our final piece. Perfect example right here. That could be a little bit deeper. Now, what we can do, I can feel that stamp sit back down in our design or our impression. Let's go a little bit harder. Yeah, there we go. Let's do the same thing to the other side. Okay, that looks pretty consistent. Now let's go over to our shell. We're just going to drop this right between the 2. That's a larger tool, so I need to work it around a little bit. Little light on the left side. So let's come back in. Lean that a little bit left. Yeah, there's our design. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing to the other piece. Well, there we go. Happy with both of those pieces. Those look good, okay? We're going to let those dry. Those need to be completely dry before our next step. So let's let those dry, work on our body and our pockets. We've got the perfect leather choice for our checkbook body and pockets. This is our Pioneer Chrome. Now, technically, it's a Pioneer Chrome oil-tanned top grain leather. We made a briefcase out of this. Love it. It's a chrome tan, but it's got a little body to it. It's a little bit thicker, too. Nice buff finish. This is going to look good with our walnut corners. All right, so let's make this easy on ourselves. We need 6.5 inches wide. We need a main body and 2 pockets. That's 13 inches long. So let's start here. I'm going to use my square, 6.5. Now let's use our knife because that's going to give us a very accurate cut, and we need everything to line up nicely. So let's come down about 13, maybe 13.5 inches, and let's make another mark, 6.5. Good. Both of those are easy enough to see. With our straight edge, let's cut between the two. And down to about there. Okay. Let's take our first piece, drop this in, and let's just scribe in our edges. Easy enough there. Okay, now let's use our square. We want these edges to be as square as we can make them. So let's square across this cut, come into our line. Good, we've got those pieces ready to go. There we are. Let's reset because we're going to take a step. We don't have to go this route, but it's a nice touch and it's an excellent technique. We're going to line our checkbook. Now, like I said, we don't have to, but it's going to be a nice touch. All kinds of reasons we would want to line a project, and it opens up so many possibilities. We've got a good video on that, so we're not going to go into great detail here, but we're going to go with our pigskin lining leather. Isn't that beautiful? And it is super lightweight, so it's not going to add a lot of weight or a lot of bulk to our checkbook cover, but it's going to be a nice touch with our walnut corners. So when we're lining leather, we're cut to size on our main body. Let's overcut our liner. There we go, and just maybe 3/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch all the way around, because we're going to glue this on, then we'll trim this to size. So again, one more reset. Let's add our glue. We're going to use contact cement to bond these two pieces together. When we do, these are going to feel, look, and react as one piece of leather. On our pigskin, let's start right here. We've overcut this. I want to try to get close to the edge. I just don't want any air pockets on the edge where our two pieces are going to separate over time. So let's put this on the edge of our table. And let's add glue lightly to the entire piece. And there we go. We've got glue on our pig. Let's slide that aside. Now over here, we need to get right to the edge, but I do not want to get glue on the top grain. Typically, if we've got a top coat on this, the glue's just going to roll right off. This has got a buff finish, not going to be the same. So let's lay this right on the edge of our table. And let's brush off. That way we're assured that we're not going to get any glue on our work surface and then move our project across it. There are all kinds of reasons we want to line our leather. In this situation, we're just going more for look than anything else. Okay, we've got good contact cement on both pieces. So let's give those 5 minutes, let that glue set. And a little dry time. What we're looking for is the glue appears and feels dry, but it's good and tacky. That's what we want. So let's take our lighter weight piece and let's drop this in right there. Good. Push that out. Now we can use our roller to press that down. Let's make sure we hit our edges. That's where we want that glue to really work for us. Okay. Now, new blade or sharp blade every time. We can absolutely use a square here if we want to. But what I'm going to do is use the edge of the project or the face as my guide. And when we pick up the trick to doing that, look how clean that edge is. Very nice. That's ready to go. So let's step back over to our punch table, work on our corners. Our corners are dry, and actually those look pretty good. Nice. Now we're going to go with a groover. I'm going to set this at 1/8 of an inch. Let's go all the way around. And those are grooved. Okay, that looks good. Now let's step over to a bisonet or bisonet edger. Actually, I've heard that pronounced both ways, but let's edge all the way around. This is a number 1. Well, those look good thus far. Let's go add some dye. We're going to go with our Pro dye in the walnut. I wish I had a prettier bottle for the camera shot, but in all honesty, I love the walnut. It's one of my 2 favorite colors. So we're just going to dip dye these. Now, lighter weight leather. This is really going to suck up the dye. But at the same time, we can typically chisel before or after we dye. In this situation, I want to chisel after we dye, simply because if our chisel holes are in that, that's going to pick up a lot of dye. So as we move through that with our thread, the thread's going to pick up that dye. So let's chisel after we add our dye. Okay, we've got that. Let's give those about 90 minutes and let those dry. Our 2 corners have had plenty of dry time and they look good. Okay, so we're going to add a top coat. This is going to enrich in our dye color, give us a little bit of a gloss. It's going to darken it a little bit, but as it dries, it'll lighten back up. Now, typically, I'll apply this with a fleece rag, simply because that holds a lot of the leather balm in it. We can do a larger project, but then let's come back with a cotton rag to buff. So let's just add our leather balm. We want to go a little bit sparingly here, but what I don't want is streaks and bubbles, because those will stand out when we buff this. Just go easy. Application, good. Okay, let's give those just about 10, maybe 15 seconds. And let's take our cotton rag and let's just buff. And not too much buffing required here. Well, there we go. That looks good. We've got some nice gloss to that. Very good. I'm going to do the same thing right here. Well, there we go. Those look good. Let's step over to our punch table. One of my favorite things to do while I'm working on a project is to get just a little bit of a preview of how it's looking. Well, thus far, very nice. Okay, so let's go back over to our 12mm corner knife and let's hit all 4 corners on our main body. And there we go. That's easy enough. Okay, let's take our tape. This is our double-sided tape. Great product. We've actually got this in 2 widths. Here's what's funny. When we get it, it looks like that. When it's been in our shop 2 minutes, it looks like that. Yeah, so we're not going to use that on camera. Let's go with the new roll. But what we're going to do is we could add contact cement here and glue these down, but that's got a little body to it. It's a smaller piece. We're going to sew on all sides, so I'm not going to worry about that. Let's just go with our double-sided tape. But I don't want these to move around when we're punching these with our chisel. So let's get tape on these 2 sides and then maybe a little bit across the center here. Now, like I said, I love this tape and I absolutely burn through rolls of this, but it can make you a little crazy trying to get the backing off. Here's a little bit of a trick. So right here, I don't know if the camera can pick that up, but I've got a little bit of the adhesive past the backing. If we try to lift that up from that point, typically it comes right up. Okay, so let's stick these onto our corners. The double-sided tape is oddly strong. That's a good bond. Now we're going to hand sew this. We can absolutely sew this on a machine, but if we don't have one, that's not going to stop us from making a beautiful project. But it's also a good point for those of us that want to step into leather or are new at it. Dive in. Nothing we've done yet has been difficult, and it's going to be the same way from here on out. So we're going to chisel on the inside of this, then we'll come around, we'll tape our pockets on, and then we'll chisel and sew on the outside. So let's start with a 2-tine. We're going to go with our 4mm. These are quality chisels because the tines are proportionally smaller, going from the 5 to the 6 or to the 4. So let's start here. Now, I don't want to start right on our incoming groove line. We're going to come in about 1/8 of an inch. So let's start right there. Let's do our best to keep our chisel straight up and down, but also I can feel it sit down in that groove line. Let's check. There we go. I can run my finger across that and I can feel that my tines have gone through. So let's take our time removing this. Good. Okay, we're going to go with our first tine, last hole. I'm going to do my best to center that tine in the hole, and then our next tine in our groove line. There we go. Okay, let's work that out. Good. Now what we can do also, we can simply mark for our next tine and pull that over. That speeds the process up a little bit. Now when we get down to our corner, and let's turn that corner. Mark, and then punch. And let's just go one more time. Good. Okay, well that actually looks pretty good and it's easy to do. I'm going to do the same thing over here. And one more. We're getting pretty close to that stitch line there, but I think we'll be all right. Okay, that looks good. Again, we don't need a sewing machine to put in a pretty stitch line. So let's step over to our pattern table and do just that. Let's start with our trusty stitching pony. This absolutely makes hand sewing so much easier. Now on our thread, we're going to go with 2 thread sizes here. Proportion to me plays a big role in this. Smaller project, I'm going to go with a smaller thread, larger thread. So right here, let's go with the 0.6 millimeter. Then we'll jump back to the 0.8 millimeter on our outside. Our needles, that's the John James number 18. My all-time favorite. It's the only needle I use. Now, on our Ritza, we could go so many ways with the color here. Make it your own, get creative. But right here, a black or a dark brown, that would look good against this leather, but it's going to disappear as we go around our corners. So let's go with a bright white. Well, first off, hand sewn. I want it visible. But secondly, that to me makes it look a little more Western. So let's start right here. We're going to go with 4 times our length. With me, really about 5. I want to have some extra thread, make sure I have ample room to tie a knot. So on our first hole, we're going to put a needle on both ends. On our first hole, let's come through. And let's equalize out our distance. Good. Now on our second hole, I'm always going to start from my top grain. This is our diamond chisel. This is going to give us our prettiest stitch. So let's come through. We're going to pull that taut and up. So that opens up that hole. So my second needle just slides right through that. All right, let's give that a little bit of tension, just enough to where I can see that stitch sink just a little bit into our leather. So let's do that again. And some tension. Actually, that's already looking good. Okay, I'm going to sew around to this side. And through our second to last hole. In all honesty, that took about 3 minutes and it looks good. We've got one more step to make that look just a little bit better. But on our last hole, let's come through from the front. Now, we don't technically have to worry about hiding our knot here. It's going to be down in our pocket. So let's do this. Let's tie a good square knot right there. So right over left, circle around, draw down, and then left over right, circle around, and draw down. Good. That's a good knot. So now let's clip that off. I'm going to use this part of my blade because I rarely ever use that. And let's pull the thread across the blade so we don't cut into our project, okay? I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. Well, very nice. There we are. And actually, that took almost no time at all, and it looks good. We're almost done with this project. Let's step back to our punch table. we're going to hammer down our stitch line. Now when I say hammer, actually what I mean is tap. We don't want to hit this so hard we're actually going to ding the leather. But what we're going to do is when we tap this down, it's going to sink our stitch line down into the groove line. That's going to keep our stitch from snagging or grabbing. But it's also going to close our holes up somewhat, and it's going to spread that stitch out. So let's do half of our first corner here, see if we can tell the difference. Yeah, there we go. Okay, a difference someone else is going to notice? Probably not, but we absolutely will. So let's finish this out. Well, there we go. That actually looks good. Right here, we've got a stitch a little longer than the rest. Will anybody see that? No. Will we? Absolutely. It will make us crazy. So next step, let's go to our groover. Now we've got a groove line on our corners. I have not changed the setting on this. Still at 1/8 of an inch. But let's groove outside of our corners. Good, now we've got a good guide for our next chisel line. So let's tape in our pockets. Okay, we've got tape on 3 sides. So let's lay this in. Now we could overcut our pockets. Tape this on and then trim to size. But the way we did this, this should be a perfect meet. And we've got a perfect meet all the way around, just what we're looking for. Okay, let's clip our corners. And we're going to go back to the 12mm corner knife, and let's just clip our corners on our pockets. Well, we are looking good thus far. Let's reset here. We're going to add in our chisel line on the outside edge. We're going to step up to a 5mm chisel. We've got a larger area to cover proportionally. That's going to look good. But one big point, we're going through 4 plies of leather here on our corners. What I'm getting at is that let's take our time here and let's make sure our chisel is straight up and down. I don't want this to lean in, because we could come through the edge of the leather. But secondly, I want our stitch line on the back to be just as consistent as it is on our face. Now with these, going through 4 plies with a 6-tine, getting through that, not really the issue. The problem is coming back out, and I don't want to distort my chisel holes. So let's back down to a 4-tine. Now we can also use our chisel to gauge our distance. So right here, I don't want to clip the edge, so let's gauge that. Exactly 9 holes. So let's go with a 4mm. Let's butt that up right against this edge. Sink that down into that chisel line. And again, let's do our best to keep that as straight up and down as we can make it. Make sure we've got tines all the way through, because that's going to help us out when we sew this. So let's work that out. Okay. Now let's come back in. First tine, last hole. Let's make sure we sink down into that groove line and keep our chisel straight up and down. Good, we've got it. Work that out. Now, let's put 2 tines in the previous 2 holes. That gives us right to the edge. Nice. Good. Now let's work that out. Now, when we make the jump up to our corners, let's just mark our first hole. Okay, good. I know exactly where that needs to be. So now actually let's jump down to a 2-tine. I'm going to sink that in my groove line best I can. And let's just go straight through. We've got it. Okay, let's work that out. Yeah, that comes out a lot easier than the 6-tine. So again, let's just mark our holes. I'm going to mark, and now let's punch. We're looking good. I'm going to work my way all the way around. Now, as we get down to our meat, we can contract or expand our stitch line, and we'll never notice this. But again, we can use our tools to gauge this. So if I've got a tine right there, we're ending right there. That's a little too long for a stitch. Again, we'll see that. So what we can do is let's mark. Good. Now let's come out just a hair past our mark. Good. Now, if we do that over the course of a half an inch or even an inch, we can really make up some space or stretch that stitch line out. Almost perfect. Exactly what we're looking for. Okay, let's go knock in a beautiful stitch line. We're going with our 0.8 millimeter roots of thread here. That's going to look good on our border, but something we need to think about. We're typically going to go about 3.5, maybe 4 times our length. Now, if you're not familiar with that, here's what's happening. So right here, we've got just about 1/8 of an inch between our chisel holes, but width-wise, we're at about 3/8 of an inch there. So we're actually using 3 times the length of the thread to go across as opposed to lengthwise. So on this, I would actually prefer maybe to go about 5 times my length. Now, one other point. We can hide a knot in several places on this. Here's what I'm talking about. We're going to start in our second hole in on our pocket, not our corner, on our pocket. We'll sew all the way around. We'll come back to that point and we'll hide our knot up under that pocket edge. Now we could, that's a long piece of thread, about 7 or 8 feet. We could simply sew from there to there, hide a knot, from there to there, hide a knot. That's a lot of knots to hide. So we're just going to go with this. Let's go with one piece, work our way all the way around. Now I'm going to flip this around. There we go. Okay, and we're going to start right back here about our second hole in. Now one more point. We've got a long piece of thread here. Well, let's choke up on our thread. Notice how much I've got past the needle. So as we move along, we can pay out thread so we don't have to keep stretching too far every time. Let's make sure we pay that thread out or we'll get a double stitch line and that will stand out like a sore thumb. So let's start right there. Equal out our thread. Good. And let's just start to sew. Now, 2 good points. Well, first off, we got the full width of the tine through our leather. So therefore, that makes it very easy on our hands to sew. But secondly, now that we're in a 1-ply area, well, technically 2, we've got the liner on that. The point is, with softer leathers, I don't want to give this too much tension widthwise. Let's do this. Let's go about every 4 stitches, and then let's pull on that lengthwise. That's going to keep that from rippling up. It's going to make it look so much better. And now we're down to our second to last hole. Now we could just come through, tie a knot on the back side, but let's hide this knot. Now what we need to happen though, is I'm going to bring this needle through this hole, our starting hole, but I want this to come out between our pocket and our liner. That liner is very thin. That's going to be tough to do. So here's a small trick that'll help us. Let's take this needle. Let's come all the way through. Now, let's come back through that same hole, but we're just going to come in between our pocket and our liner. Yeah, there we go. Let's pull that, pop that through, good. Now this piece, same thing. We're just going to go through this back ply, and that's easy enough. Good. Okay, let's add a little tension to that. Now, what I'm going to do, so let's tie our square knot. So let's go right over left. We're going to circle around, and then let's use our finger down in that pocket to really get that knot tight. Okay, left over right, circle around, and let's do the same thing. Good. That's a secure knot. Now let's pull this good and taut. And let's run that across our blade. Good. Now those 2 little tails are going to sink back down in there. Actually, that looks pretty good. All right, one more step. Let's step over to our punch table. Let's hammer down this stitch line, but when we get to our chrome areas, let's back off on the pressure just a little bit. And there we are. That's a great project. Now, a big point for the new folks. This looks like a complicated product, but when we break it down into steps, actually it's not. Nothing difficult here. Now, here's another good trick. I keep blanks of just about everything. Business cards, credit cards, checkbooks. Well, let's see how this works. So there's our ledger. There's our face. And that slides right in. Very nice. Now, a little stiff across the spine. The one thing that's going to cure that, a little bit of use. And for those of us with a little more experience, so many ways we can step up this project. We can treat our edges. Stamp combinations, I've added this up. 46 million possibilities and counting. But dye colors, chrome colors, combinations, the point here, make it your own, have a great time doing it, and I hope your checkbook cover is gorgeous. Good luck with your projects.